Um, Sorry, I just got that notification. It's being recorded. So first off, forgive me for the fact that I'm using my tablet, which I've never done before for Zoom. So it kind of like zooms in on me and it's kind of weird angle sometimes. So forgive me for that. I'll do my best to look at the camera right here. But so forgiveness has been extremely powerful for me because I've lived a very extreme life. And I want to share with you my life story a bit and how Buddhism, meditation, and forgiveness has been a large part of me turning my life around. You see, and I'll tell you too, I shared my story in two big ways this week. For those who follow me on social media, you may already know, I just flew home from New Mexico where I was at a conference with the FBI. And I work alongside with somebody from the behavioral analysis unit, trying to prevent terrible crimes like my own. And I shared my story with hundreds of agents just on Tuesday. And it's very hard for me to do because forgiveness is still something I struggle with. And that's why I still talk about it all the time. And then I was also on a podcast this week, believe it or not. It's been a very big week for me. But so many people have reached out to me and told me how powerful, the talk was. And so I'm going to kind of share a bit with you guys tonight, because so many others have been touched by my story. But I'll give you the more of the Buddhist-led version, and how I've been able to live the life I am today because of the Buddhist teachings. So first, I do want to talk about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not, because we often have a misconstrued idea of what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is not saying that what somebody did was okay. Forgiveness is not saying what somebody did not hurt, did not traumatize. Forgiveness is not saying that they shouldn't be held accountable. Forgiveness is basically recognizing that I'm not going to hold on to the anger, and I'm going to see this person as somebody who is capable of change. And I'll first tell you also the main story that impacted me during my incarceration from the Buddha is when the Buddha was teaching and he was surrounded by disciples. There was a man who came upon them, and he came up to the Buddha and he spit on him right in the face. And, the disciples and everybody there are shocked. They're taken aback. And you would expect the Buddha to react with anger and disgust at this individual. But he says to the man, okay, and so that even takes the man back in shock, because this man has done this to many others who have reacted with anger and frustration. But here he literally spits on the Buddha, who's supposed to be this, main huge figure that so many people are following. And he did it in front of his followers. And the Buddha just said, okay, and even his disciples responded with, no, this is too much. What do you want us to do to him? And he says, for what? This man probably heard some things about me. He does not know me. He does not know any of us. This is him spitting on his own self, basically, is what he said. And so everybody was taken aback, including the man who had spit on him. And the man leaves. And he comes back the next day and he throws himself down at the Buddha's feet. And the Buddha says, okay, and the man says, forgive me for what I've done to you. The Buddha says, you're not the same man you were before. You're not who you were 24 hours ago. Each man is a river, continuously flowing, continuously changing. It may appear the same on the outside, but the river you see one day to the next is completely different water flowing through. And this touched me when I read it because I was sitting in maximum security prison where you can think of the worst thing somebody can do is to disrespect you, especially in front of other people like this. And it's like, really, like, is this something that you could be really capable of? And you think, okay, maybe him, if this is an enlightened figure in a spiritual climate. But I began to question myself, and I began to wonder, okay, and isn't he right? Don't we all change from one day to the next, 1 year to the next? Haven't I changed? We are not the people we were when we were teenagers, and we definitely don't look like we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because we're all a river, continuously flowing, continuously changing. And if that's so, then why should we look upon the next person as if they are the same as they were before? And I've been lucky enough to have people view me like this. And I'll give you the quick rundown, although it may not be the norm here. I've been here for just a little while, but people know some of my story. And I'll share with you how people have forgiven me and how I've forgiven others. So the reason why and again, forgive me for getting emotional, but I always believe it's best to share with an open heart and to be genuine and to really show the emotion. But so the reason why I was in prison, the reason why the FBI is interested in me is because when I was 16 years old and I was filled with pain and I was filled with anger, I did my best. No, let me take that back. I didn't do my best. I made a small attempt at getting my life together. And you can imagine, as a 16-year-old kid, I didn't put in as much effort, nearly as much effort as I should have. And forgive me if you can hear my cat in the background. Yes, honey, I know. Hold on, let me open the door so she can come in. There you go. And again, when I speak of these things, when I speak of the pain and the anger I felt at that young age, I'm not making excuses for what I had done. I'm not saying that there's any type of justification for what I'd done. But when I was 16, I walked into my high school with a gun. And although my intentions were a bit different than what you see a lot of times on the news today, my intentions were to psychologically terrorize classmates and staff, but I wasn't there to kill. I was there because I wanted to die. I couldn't do it at home, and I figured, let me show others that I'm mad at them and that I blame them for my death. And I wanted them to see me because I felt I wasn't seen. I wanted them to hear me because I felt I wasn't heard. And I did just that. I caused pain and suffering to countless people. And sadly, when I was being disarmed because I fired a few rounds above students' heads, and somebody ended up coming and grabbing me from behind, the gun went off during the struggle and a teacher was hit in the leg. Thankfully, he was the only person injured physically, but psychologically, countless. But you know what? You know why I bring that up with you? Is because during all of my time in prison, and even since coming home from prison, people have shown me compassion, despite the understandable anger and hate that some felt. And I'm sure some still do feel that way. The people who've reached out to me have forgiven me, have shown compassion to me, have wanted to help me. And the reality is, forgiveness is powerful for the one who's receiving it, but it's actually more powerful for the person doing it. And I learned that also in a very hard way, because I came home from prison after 17 years and I had jobs and I was doing good. You know, I'm very lucky to have resources, but uh, I wanted to work a more meaningful job. So I literally quit one of my jobs in the middle of the day and went and started to volunteer at a homeless shelter. And they loved me. So they told me, we want you to work here. We have a position open, put in an application. And so I began to work there. And they knew of my past. But again, forgiveness is powerful, right? Well, let me say, long story short, as far as the extremeness of my life, I was working there for a while when a man came in who I didn't recognize. He wasn't a normal, um, you know, we have a lot of regulars, and he was very angry and he was yelling at one of my coworkers. And so me and some other of my coworkers, we step in to de-escalate the situation and let him know it's okay. You're okay here. We're trying to help you have some lunch, take a seat, everything's good. And he still was angry. After a while, he seemed to calm down, but next thing you know, he's probably has severe mental health issues. And he starts yelling, and now he starts being upset with me. Okay, I'm used to it. Anybody who's worked a job, you know, any type of job where you're working with either a homeless population or people who may struggle with mental illness, you get used to it. You don't take it personal. But eventually, even the other guests, you know, everybody, it was just too much. So we had to ask him to leave. Well, we didn't have security. We didn't check their property. We didn't have metal detectors. And he had swords. And he almost dismembered me. He almost cut off my hands completely. He almost took off my right leg. He almost took off my left foot. He was trying to take off my head. I managed to fight him off as best I could. But he left. Nobody was able to stop him, even though they tried. He left only because he thought he had done enough to kill me, which actually he had. It was only because the police were able to show up so quick and put tourniquets on me. And the damage was mostly done to my, you know, my arms and my legs, but I was still bleeding out. And so those tourniquets saved my life. And I was in a coma for a couple of days. And I was hospitalized, and in I was 34 years old. And after I spent 5 weeks in the hospital, I was in such bad condition, I couldn't even go to a rehab center because all four of my limbs were so badly injured. I had to go to a nursing home and recover there. So I spent months there. But you know what? Almost instantly, when I woke up from that coma, I was afraid, but I was also forgiving. And my thoughts were of others. not just my family, who I was blessed to have when I woke up, they were already there by my side. But even I remember uh, the first police officer who came to the scene, and I remember everything. I remember the attack. I was still conscious despite everything. But the first police officer who showed up on the scene, he found me. You know, my coworkers had wrapped me up in towels and everything to try to stop the bleeding. I still remember that police officer, and he came to visit me in the hospital, and he told me he didn't sleep for 3 days after finding me. You know, and I'm sorry again if this is all too much, but and he knew of my past, and he again expressed, "I'm not worried about your past. That's not who you are today." You know, just like the Buddha had told that individual who spit on him, it's not who you are today. And, you know, for as an ex-convict, or excuse me, formerly incarcerated person, um, that meant a lot. And he kept visiting me in the hospital, and he still talks to me today. Um, but when people started to talk about letting me know he had been arrested almost immediately afterwards, and he had been charged and almost indicted within a week, I wasn't angry. You know, despite the fact that I was lying in a hospital bed. At that time, I was completely unable to move anything except my head because my body was in such traumatic shock. I wasn't angry. Now, I joke around and tell people, well, I was also on some really good medication, you know? But at the same time, I spent a lot of years angry. I spent a lot of years angry. Even when you're first in prison, I think for a lot of us, you're angry at yourself, you're angry at the system, and you're angry at those around you. And yeah, I gave into that anger. I had plenty of moments where I fought. And when I was in my cell, I yelled, I screamed. I'd be, our bed frames weren't nailed. I mean, not, they weren't bolted down or anything. So there was times where I'd just be picking it up and just slamming it just to make noise, just to be heard because I was angry. So even after this, why be angry at him? You know, why hold on to that anger? Because forgiveness is not saying that what he did is okay. Forgiveness is not saying that he shouldn't be held accountable. Forgiveness is simply saying, I see everybody as somebody different today. And for me to hold on to that anger towards what happened yesterday, it's not worth it. I'm going to be on point. I'm going to be aware and I'm going to be mindful, but I'm not going to be angry. And, let me now back up and tell you a little bit more about while I was incarcerated. Some of the Buddhist teachings, besides that one story that really hit home with me, was um, I'm trying to, well, here, I'll lighten the mood a little bit. Forgive me. For those who weren't here last week, I'll share. We were talking about the Four Noble Truths and the origins of suffering, because anger is definitely it's one of the three fires, right? One of the three roots of suffering, because we're all seeking the end to suffering, the end of samsara, the cycle of suffering, that we continuously get into that loop of, if only this was going on in my life, I would feel better. If only I had, while I was in prison, I remember, if mail comes today, if I get that letter today, I'm going to be happy. And maybe you do get that letter, and maybe you do feel happy, but for how long, right? How long? And so anyways, last week when we talked about the origins of suffering, and we broke into small groups, I was reminded of, I think it was Pema Chodron, who's one of my favorite Buddhist authors, talking about the suffering of chocolate cake, right? And so I'll share this again because, again, I want to lighten the mood, and I've been extremely heavy for all of you. So the suffering of chocolate cake is you're out with some friends, you're at a restaurant, you have a wonderful dinner, you order some desserts, right? Everybody's like, yeah, I want this, I want that. You say, I would like to have some cherry pie. And 10 minutes later, the waiter comes and, is handing out desserts to everybody and hands you chocolate cake. Now, you love chocolate cake. Everybody loves chocolate cake, right? But it's not what you ordered. It's not what you expected. So your mind starts to go into, what? No, this isn't what I ordered. Why did he give this to me? Should I say something? Yeah, of course I should say something, but I feel bad. And by the time I give it to him and he brings it back and they bring me cherry pie, it's going to be 10 minutes later and everybody else is going to be, and your mind, it just continues to go and go. And here you are suffering because you got chocolate cake. you know, um, and obviously that's a very light example, but I remember reading that also, and that was one of the teachings that really stuck with me, is that our anger, our suffering, the origins of it is just life not giving us what we expected, what we desired, what we were holding on to, right? And obviously, when you're sitting in a prison cell, that's not what you expected out of life. That's not what you're holding on to for your future dreams and aspirations. However, what can you do to work with it? Or as, you know, um, there's another quote, not by the Buddha, obviously, but somebody said that you can't change the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I loved that. That was another one of the things that stuck out with me, and really helps touch me. So I began while I was incarcerated, and I was just in my early 20s when I came to Buddhism. That, okay, here I am. What can I do to turn my life around? And one of the biggest things I had to work on, and I'm still working on a decade later, as you can see, is self-forgiveness. And I had to realize that, again, forgiveness is not saying what I did was okay, that I shouldn't be held accountable. Forgiveness is not saying that, people are going to forget about this. No, you know, forgiveness is saying that I can let go of the anger, even towards myself. And so I began the meditation on forgiveness, and it's been one of my favorite ones. And that's why when had asked me if I was interested in doing something with everybody, that's immediately what came to my mind. Is because it has been one of the most transformational things for me, because it's, again, you're acknowledging what happened. You are acknowledging the pain within you. You are acknowledging the pain you have caused others, right? Or that others may have caused you. You're acknowledging everything and you're bringing it home, but you're also letting it go. And you're also, when people say moving on, you're not quite moving on, but you're working with it, right? Because one of the best things that we can do is to then, and this is something that came more from therapy than Buddhism, but to use your shame, your guilt, and remorse to push you forward, to help you be motivated to do better, to want to help others. And it's because you're acknowledging what has happened and you feel that and you're angry and you want something to be different. But instead of holding on to that anger and allowing you to be just falling apart and not being present in the moment anymore, you use it to push you forward and to connect with others and to do something so that others won't experience that pain and suffering. And I think that that's one of the main ways, for myself at least, that when we talk about the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. And when we get into the fourth noble truth and the eightfold path and all of those, the mindful thoughts, the mindful lifestyle, all of those different parts is based on forgiveness, is based on not holding on to that anger that we naturally feel. And don't get me wrong, anger is perfectly natural. I think that's why I like, instead of the three poisons, right? People talk about the three fires. I enjoy that translation because all of these emotions, right? Anger, greed, and ignorance are all perfectly normal, right? Just like fire is perfectly normal, but you have to allow it to burn its natural course and to burn out without adding fuel to that fire. Because when you add fuel to the fire is when the cycle of suffering, is when samsara just continues and continues and continues. So forgiveness for me has been one of the main keys on extinguishing those fires, or at least not allowing them to burn and burn and burn. So I would like to go into the meditation practice of forgiveness with all of you now. And thank you for allowing me to share. I know it's a heavy topic and it may have been too heavy for some, and I apologize for that. But I think it's been such a overwhelming week for me. But through sharing my story, so many people that have, have reached out to me. I have a wallet filled with cards from law enforcement all around the country who want to talk with me more. I figured, all right, maybe this Sangha will allow me to open up, and maybe it'll allow you to see into me a little bit deeper, and maybe see into yourself a little bit deeper, and to hopefully learn the power of forgiveness, because it's transformative. Sorry. And yeah, so for us to begin the meditation, if that's all right now, one of the key things is to be able to, if you're sitting, as I think most of us are, is to find a comfortable position, whether you're able to sit upright and allow your breath to come kind of naturally, allow your airways from your diaphragm at the, right below your navel, all the way up through your mouth and through your nose, to be perfectly open, and to allow the breath come and go. And to first feel a few breaths where, as you're breathing in, you notice where the breath is. Do you feel the breath rising and falling in your chest? Do you feel the breath rising and falling in your stomach? Do you feel it naturally as it comes in and out of your nostrils? Or is your focus more on your abdomen and on your chest? Is your breath shallow and fast, or is your breath deep and slow? Take a few moments and get in touch with your breath, naturally as it is. Don't try to control it. Right now, I just want you to be in touch with it, and to be in touch with your body, and to be in touch with this moment, just as it is. And as your mind begins to wander, as it naturally will, I want you to just calmly bring your focus back onto the sensation of breath. Don't judge yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Just naturally come back to the breath. Come back to the sensation and find where it is within you. Now, I would like for you to slowly deepen your breath a little bit. Focus on counting in 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you can, breathe out for a 6 count of slowly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you can repeat this, continue on 1, 2, 3, 4, and out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And continue. And as you breathe out, I also want you to allow your body to relax. Feel in your body where it might be tense, whether it's in your jaw or your shoulders or your hands or in your chest. Allow it to relax, especially on that out breath. And as we feel ourselves hopefully relaxing just a little bit more, now I want us to begin. When we speak of forgiveness, remember, we are not speaking of forgetting or saying that it is okay. We are simply allowing ourselves to let go of the anger or feel it slip away little by little, because it will not disappear all tonight, but hopefully you'll be able to feel it just ease away a little bit at a time. And we're going to begin by one of the more difficult ones, forgiving ourselves for the ways that we have hurt our own self. So as you continue to breathe, I want you to say to yourself, for all the ways I have hurt myself, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. And I want you to imagine some of the ways, some of the smaller ways first, that you have harmed yourself. And imagine yourself in that moment. And as you say, for all the ways that I have hurt myself, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. Allow a little bit of that pain and anger we feel towards ourselves to slip away for what we did in that moment. And as we take a few more breaths, we move from situation to situation in which we have harmed ourselves. And we say, for all the ways I have harmed myself, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. And if you feel comfortable, you can move on to the bigger things in which you have harmed your own self. And I'll give you a few moments to work through these situations in which you say, for all the ways I have harmed myself, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. Now, as we continue on, I would like for us to think of the ways in which we have harmed others. It may be something as small as something we have said to somebody in which we regretted, whether instantly or later on. Maybe we're thinking of ways in which we've harmed people unconsciously, where we've said something in which we didn't mean anything by it, and we didn't even realize we had harmed them. But we still wish to forgive ourselves, knowing that sometimes our speech is not mindful. Or we may be forgiving ourselves for the larger things, for the things that we wish more than anything else we could take back. But since we cannot, we forgive ourselves and we work on releasing that anger that we hold towards ourselves. And as we breathe in, we say, for all the ways that I have hurt others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. And again, we're bringing these moments into our mind and we're allowing ourselves to let go of the anger that we feel towards ourselves for what we did in that moment. We allow ourselves to realize we are not that same person today. We are moving forward as the river does. We are working towards being a better, stronger self. So again, as we breathe in, for all the ways I have harmed others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. And again, after you finish saying it, allow your body to ease just a little bit also. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel your jaw loosen. Feel your hands as they might be in a fist loosen up also. And I'll give you a few moments to say, for all the ways I have hurt others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive myself. Now I would like to bring us to the next phase in which we are forgiving others who have harmed us. But I first want you to focus on somebody who you care about deeply, somebody who you love. Because even those who we love have harmed us in one way or another, just as we have harmed them. So I want you to bring somebody to your mind who you have held some type of grudge, whether it's small or large. Bring that to your mind and say, for all the ways you have harmed me, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. You may want to start off with the small things, such as words said, or maybe something they forgot to do for you. But I want you to be able to say, for all the ways in which you have hurt me, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And allow you to take a few moments to think of different people who you love and care about, and in different ways in which they have harmed you consciously and unconsciously, so that you may work on forgiving them. And next, I would like for us to move on to those in our life who we have pleasant feelings towards, but maybe not as strongly. Maybe a friend, maybe a coworker, maybe somebody we used to hang out with and had pleasant moments with. And yet there still may be moments in which we felt harmed by them. And I want us to imagine those moments and to imagine that individual and say, for all the ways you have harmed me, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. It's always easiest to start off with the smaller things. And if you feel willing and able to work up to the larger things that maybe these people who you care about, who you're friendly with, have done. And for all the ways you have harmed me, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And now I want to bring your attention to the people who you are neutral with, the people who you are passing by in your everyday life. And I want you to think about forgiving them, not just for the ways that maybe they bumped into you and you want to forgive them for the ways that they've harmed you, but also think about the ways that they've harmed others. Because we want to be able to forgive people, not just for the ways they've harmed us, but the ways that they have harmed everybody. So I want us to now transition to those neutral people and to think, for all the ways you have harmed myself and others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And because these people are neutral, you may not have strong feelings, you may not have ever felt harmed by somebody, but you can imagine maybe they've harmed others and you still want to forgive them and recognize the person they were in that moment is not the person who they are today. So, for all the ways that you have harmed myself and others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And focus on this for a few more moments. Let our next thoughts be of the people that we might not like. Maybe we don't hold a hatred towards them, but there's just something about them that we don't like. And I want you to think about the moments in which they have harmed you or maybe harmed somebody else. And I want you to picture that moment as you say, for all the ways you have harmed myself and others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And again, as we work on saying, I forgive you, allow your body to release that tension, to release that anger, to release everything you feel physically and emotionally. And think of those moments and think, for all the ways you have harmed myself and others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And for the last process, if you are willing, I want you to bring somebody into your mind who you have strong dislike for, who you might even say you have a hatred for. And I want you to see them as a human being. And I want you to believe that even though they may not be a better person today, they have the ability to change. And even if they don't have the ability to change, you have the ability to release the anger that you hold. You have every right to keep this person at a distance. You have every right to want this person to be held accountable for whatever wrongs they may have done. But I want you to be able to say, for all the things you have done to harm myself and others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And if you find this to be too distressful to bring somebody who you truly do not like, please go back to something you are more comfortable with and think about maybe somebody whom you have a dislike for, but not a strong dislike, and work on that, saying, for all the ways you have harmed myself and others, consciously and unconsciously, I forgive you. And now I would like for you to simply bring your attention back to your breath, back to your body, back to simply just focusing on the sound of my voice, on where in your body your breath is. And I would like to end the meditation with a gassho, hands together, and a simple bow of gratitude for all of you allowing me to be here with you today in such a deep way and fashion. I thank you. And with that, I know it's still a little bit early, but I was hoping that we would have a prompt, and I wasn't prepared to go too long. But if it would be okay, I would like to offer a prompt maybe that we can speak on, if that would be okay. Yeah. Well, then my prompt for everybody to speak on is, let's not go with forgiveness. Let's not go with anything too deep. I think we've gone deep enough today. Let's go with something that brought you happiness this past week. So to start it off, if it's okay, I would like to call on Lori and ask you to start things off for us.